Hey, welcome to the Relentless Positivity Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Martin, and my guest today is Michael Peterson. He's what's called an approach coach. He's a transformational guy, a ceremonialist focused on helping people on the path of self discovery to transform outdated ways of being so they can blossom. Some pretty cool stuff, but he's also here to kind of tell us about the good, the bad, the ugly, about that all ayahuasca stuff you keep hearing about that the kids are talking about these days. So, Michael, thanks for being on, man.
Thanks for having me on, Joe. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I said, I think people have a lot of questions about ayahuasca. They've heard of it. Maybe they've just seen it in the news or something like that. So let's just kind of go back. What is ayahuasca? What's it made out of?
Gotcha. So, ayahuasca is a psychedelic brew that is most common now to be due to Aaron Rodgers and other people of that ilk. But it's a little bit tricky. So, there are two components in the ayahuasca brew, two primary ones. There's the ayahuasca vine itself, which is Benistorus capi. And then there is another plant called chacruna. Most usually it's chacruna. There's a few different plants that could be mixed in, but those are the two primary plants. And when they're mixed together, they have a psychedelic effect. And they've been used for millennia.
Yeah. So that's cool, man. I mean, like I said, you hear that word as kind of an umbrella term. I didn't know there was actually two parts of it. So you're already
Yeah.
educated, man. So we're on a roll already. So
Yeah. So, I mean, it depends on how technical people want to get, right? So, it's most commonly known when people are talking about ayahuasca, they're referring to a brew, which is a combination of those two plants. And then sometimes other plants are mixed in as well. Other plants within that jungle plant medicine, traditional Amazonian plant medicine schema, there's different trees, different herbs, different shrubs that can get mixed into the brew, each with their own effect, intention, and usage. And every person who is serving ayahuasca and cooking their own medicine will generally have a recipe or a brew that they like to make. But the essence of it is just those two plants.
nice. So you kind of mentioned the Amazon people. How do they use it kind of in their spiritual practices and things like that?
Yeah. So when we're talking about traditional Amazonian plant medicine, I kind of feel like I need to give a bit of a framework here. So there are a lot of different indigenous tribes in the Amazon basin, and they have all used ayahuasca for, or not all, but many have used ayahuasca for a variety of different reasons. And then you also have the mestizo lineages of traditional Amazonian plant medicine use that developed once the Spanish came in and mixed with the indigenous populations, and that has its own use. But the essence of it is that each culture that's there has their own cosmology. And for some people, ayahuasca was viewed within that cosmology as a way to connect with the spirit world, to connect with the deities and spirits that are there, the energies that are there. It is used for healing. It is used for kind of a social cohesion in some tribes as well. And it can be used as a divinatory practice or even as a rites of passage. And so what we're seeing now is very different from, and also very similar to how it has been used. So the best way that I have to explain it in terms of some of the shifts that we're seeing is that I'm trained and I'm a mesa holder for a mestizo lineage. So it's that mix between the Spanish and the indigenous populations. And traditionally, the way that it worked was that the shaman or the ayahuasquero or curandero would be the one who drank the brew, and then they would use it as a diagnostic tool in order to figure out what was going on in the community with somebody's health, whatever it may be. And then they would prescribe some sort of cure, whether that was a different plant, whether it was a course of action or a ritual. And so now we're having a very different context for how it's used, and there's been an evolution that's gone along with that.
Yeah, that's a little bit of change from like indigenous people to Aaron Rodgers and everything that's in between. But man, take us through it. I mean, you've been through it yourself, and Jonathan, what the ceremony looks like, what happens on it. Take us through your personal experience of these things.
Cool. So basic format of an ayahuasca ceremony, and again, it can change depending on who's leading it, but it's everybody comes together in the modern context. Everybody comes together. You take some time to settle into the ceremony space. The space is energetically sealed with smudge or so sage, palo santo, some sort of incense, and that helps clear out the space as well as kind of set the boundary of the container. Then whoever is leading the ceremony will call in the directions, and that helps provide orientation and give more structure to the space. And once all that energetic footwork is kind of set, then one by one, everybody will drink the medicine, and the shaman will serve you whatever your cup is, in terms of quantity. And there can be a small conversation about how much are you looking for? What are your intentions? And as you go up and you receive your cup, you sit there and you set an intention. And that a good catch-all intention that I have gotten from my teachers is very simple to remember. It's THC. Teach what needs to be taught, heal what needs to be healed, clean what needs to be cleaned. You can also take kind of what I call the confessional approach. Here's where I'm at. I don't know what's going on. It's a little bit scary. I'm looking for help. And then you drink the cup. At which point in time, you'll go back to your space and the effects of the medicine will start kicking in. And that takes about 30 minutes to an hour, during which the facilitator or shaman is going to start singing. And they are singing icaros, which are medicine songs, and they carry the energy of the plants or the spirits that they are calling, as weird and woo-woo as that sounds. But the medicine itself carries its own energy and its own healing properties. And then the icaros carry their own healing properties, and they come together to guide the ceremony. And every ceremony lasts somewhere between 5 and 7 hours is a good average. And it's led the entire time. And then at the end or towards the end, you will receive a limpieza or a ventiata, which is a personal clearing and healing instead of just the communal work that is happening. In the middle of ceremony, there is a lot that can happen. Um, you know, ayahuasca is probably most famous for the visionary psychedelic effects, right? So outside of Aaron Rodgers talking about it, people generally end up hearing the highs and the lows. It's like politics, right? You know, you're on one side or the other. This was either the best thing that happened to me or it was the worst. And there's a lot of space in between. So if you get the light show, you'll have visions and maybe you'll see spirits or entities and all these magical things that can happen. And it can be overwhelming. And that can go positively for you or it can go negatively for you in terms of how you are relating to it. There's also a lot of space in between where the medicine can be very somatic and it's very much so in your body and it's a physical experience versus a visionary one. And it can be anywhere in between that. So it's hard to explain exactly what will happen in an ayahuasca space until you go into one. And I think that's what makes it kind of scary for people because they're stepping into the unknown. And the truth of the matter is that no matter how many times you work with the medicine, drink ayahuasca, do whatever it may be, every ceremony is different. And so you might get more familiar and more comfortable with the routine, the approach. But there is, I want to be very careful with how I say this. Ayahuasca can be incredibly safe. And I mean, from a health standpoint, it can actually be incredibly good for you from a health standpoint. And we can talk about those reasons. Um, but when we are doing transformational work in our lives, it is inherently unsafe to the version of us that we currently are.
Sure.
And so when we're intentionally and willingly stepping into those spaces where we can encounter transformation, it's healthy to be nervous. And so I think that kind of gives a nice general outline of ceremony. After you've drank and the medicine has gone down, there will be a closing where the shaman says, okay, here's a prayer, and closes the directions down and states ceremony is now complete. And that's that.
Talk to me about the purging part. I've heard a little bit about the purging part. Talk to me about it.
Oh, everybody loves the purging part.
You got to.
So it's funny because a lot of times people come in and they're so nervous about purging. They're like, I just don't want to purge. And then I watch them in ceremony and they're struggling because the medicine has a certain frequency, and it's a very high frequency if you want to think about it in this way. The trauma, the shit in our life has a little bit of a lower frequency. It's denser. And it can't coexist at that same level. And so the medicine is consistently pushing these things up so that they could be released. Sometimes that is purging and it looks like vomit, right? And it's not like, oh, I've got food poisoning vomit. It has a very different feel to it. But purging can also be shaking, crying, mental thought patterns and loops just going around and around in circles. It's like your brain is working itself to clear them out of it. And so there's a reason that prior to ceremony, there's dietary restrictions in terms of what your time food cutoff is, the types of foods that you can eat, all of this. And so you're not going in there with like a full stomach and you're throwing up all this stuff. There's something different that's coming out of your system, and it is energetic, and there's a physical representation of that too. Yeah. It's the best. It's literally the best thing ever.
Get the bad stuff out, right?
That's what yeah, rather out than in.
That's
but getting to that point, like sometimes because we can go over and help people move this energy through. As facilitators, the intention is never to suppress anything that's coming up. The intention is to help it work its way through and be released. So there can be intensity that arises as somebody's receiving help. And the amounts of times are just like, if you would just stop fighting this purge, if you just let it go, it would be great. And it would be so much easier for you. But the challenge comes from all of the holding on. And it's not even conscious half the time. We all have patterns, beliefs, things that we hold on to that help give us structure to our lives. And as we change, those patterns either have to be transformed or let go of. And ayahuasca is very, very capable at supporting that process.
Yeah, for sure. That's cool, man. So you mentioned earlier kind of the medicinal properties of it. What's the current research on what people are talking about? Not just the woo-woo stuff like we've heard about. Like, what's the actual hard evidence we're talking about?
Yeah, so ayahuasca research is still limited in some ways due to restrictions about where it's legal. But for the research that is being done, seen very strong positive effects on mental health, specifically depression and anxiety. There are positive effects on PTSD. Um, Substance abuse as well is having reduction through ayahuasca. And just that personal growth and a sense of well-being is positive as well. So there can be stress reduction in our everyday lives. Uh, Scientifically, ayahuasca is very good at neurogenesis. And that is the process through which our brain cells form new neural pathways. And it is ridiculous how cool it is because not only are you forming new neural pathways in ceremony, right? And rewiring how you have been relating to traumas and other things in your life, you are primed after retreat or after ceremony to reinvigorate or start a new practice so that and your brain just hooks onto it, so it's much easier to fall into a specific positive flow instead of a negative flow.
That's awesome, man. If you can groove those neural pathways, I mean, you can form the habits you want to form right there. That's cool.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you kind of mentioned a little bit earlier as well. What is kind of the legal status of ayahuasca in different parts of the world?
So places like Peru, Ecuador, Brazil, fully legal. Portugal, because they've decriminalized everything, legal. Costa Rica, legal. Mexico is somewhere weird and in between.
That sounds like most. Yeah, it seems like.
Yep. Uh, in terms of in the United States, which is what half of the people on your podcast probably are like, do I have to travel far away to go do it? Um, Places that you would imagine in the US have different legal standings around it. California has its own approach, specifically in Oakland. Oregon has arguably a legalized uh, approach to it. Colorado has, I believe, a decriminalized approach to ayahuasca. Specifically, the city of Ann Arbor, Michigan,
Wow.
has decriminalized ayahuasca. However, federally, it is still illegal, with the exception of some specific churches. Because similar to peyote, there are churches that work with ayahuasca as a sacrament. And it is a protected right. And the US government has lost enough of those lawsuits, quite frankly, at this point in time, that they are trying to settle things more efficiently so that they don't continue to build precedent for legalizing ayahuasca as a whole. And there's a psychedelic renaissance happening across the US right now, as many people are aware. However, it's still a much larger debate because there's a difference between saying, oh, I'm going to stay at home and drink some ayahuasca today. Unless you're trained, I wouldn't recommend that. Versus, hey, I'm going to, smoke some pot today and chill out. And if we're having this conversation around cannabis, which is already still a tension point in the US, talking about psychedelics, which have a much stronger and much more transformational capability, do we keep it in a therapist's office? Do we have it in a more ceremonial container because we don't necessarily want to make everything so mental? We cannot take a psychological approach to heal a spiritual ill. And that is a tough cookie to crack.
Yeah, a friend of mine went to a church down in Orlando. Did a ceremony down there. So yeah, this was about 5 or 6 years before I haven't even really heard much about it. I was like, oh, what are you doing? What? You can't have red meat. What's going on? What are you doing? I
Yeah,
didn't know anything about it, but he kind of filled me in. It's yeah, I didn't know it's a protected thing by churches.
it is. And I think if I had to guess, it was Spirit Walk or something along those lines down in Orlando at that point in time. And there are a few of them, and they're, like anything else, My encouragement to your listeners is ayahuasca can be absolutely life changing. It can be wonderful. And you just have to do it right. And by doing it right, I don't mean in ceremony itself. That's in many ways the easy part. But do the research, find facilitators who you trust. There are people who do it, but I wouldn't recommend it. Like, don't go down to the jungle and just find some random person to serve you ayahuasca. Like, you know, there's enough well-trained facilitators out there who you can communicate with, who can at least point you in the right direction, even if they're not the right fit for you. So you're your own best advocate as you navigate this path.
So in 50 years, where do you see kind of the legal status of ayahuasca? Is it just so like it is now, or you think it's more wide open? What are your predictions? Putting you on the spot right here, man.
Yeah, that's a. Hmm. I think that in 50 years, our relationship with psychedelics as a whole is going to be very, very different. At least I certainly hope that it is. Um, in regards to how it's used, I hope that it's actually still protected to some degree because while I'm all for the evolution that comes with the diaspora, right? Ayahuasca is no longer just in the jungle. There's people using it in new ways. You know, do I want to see us living in a world where you can just take your ayahuasca pill and it's like just a chemical compound and the spirit has been taken out of it? No. And so in 50 years, I think the legal landscape will have changed. It will be softer, but we'll still be navigating how to best support the balance between traditional use, innovative use, public evolution, and public safety.
Yeah, so you don't want a Pfizer ayahuasca pill. You don't want
I
that.
don't. I don't. I really don't. For so many reasons.
I'm with you on that one. So another kind of famous ayahuasca story is Neil Brennan. His story was, he's an atheist. He went in and had a ceremony. Now he's a full-on believer in God. Is that typical of ayahuasca with far as spirituality? Have you seen some of that before?
Absolutely. I mean, it speaks to some of my experience as well. I think everybody is on a spiritual journey. And so whether you want to talk about God, spirit, the mystery, choose your word for it. You're relating to it one way or the other. And even if you're relating to it via science and you say there is no God, right? Like this is just the natural order of the universe and it works this way, then you're putting the natural order of the universe on a pedestal and you're saying that is what it is. Um, you know, so what ayahuasca can help us do is open us up to new possibilities and put us back into connection with what was and what has always been. It's a non-specific amplifier. So when you amplify every dynamic of your being, it is much easier to see your divine nature. And then you can't really hide from it. You have to start relating to it in a different way. And so, look, I mean, if somebody says, I'm an atheist, I say, great for you. I'm not here to convince anybody to believe in God. We are all damaged in terms of what has occurred through, and I hope your readers don't crucify me, no pun intended, but the religious framework and institutions, specifically around Christianity, have had some really damaging effects in terms of people's relationship with spirit. And there has been a role that has been played of the church being a mediator between humans and the divine. That was never the original role of the priest or of the shaman, I mean, or of the oracle. They would have the ability and maybe more accessibility to hear the direct communication, but we are all capable of having a direct relationship to the mystery. And if you look at things like Celtic Christianity or Celtic spins of Christianity, one of the major differences is that there was no concept of original sin. It was you are sacred, not you are broken. And so what ayahuasca can help us do is start relating to that brokenness or feeling of brokenness within us and start healing that. And part of that healing occurs, if not the majority of that healing occurs, through connecting to the divine. And you can call it whatever you want. You can call it energy, God, spirit, the mystery, but it's something bigger than yourself. And you can't argue with it. And you can't argue with your own experience. So that's also where integration becomes quite the challenge. But yeah, it happens pretty consistently where people have some sort of spiritual, I hate saying spiritual awakening, but that's what it is. It's a spiritual remembering. And there's a lot of different tools and technologies out there in terms of the spiritual tools and technologies that can be of assistance through that.
That's it. So if someone's listening right now, like, I, I think I'm ready. I think I want to give this a shot. Where do they start?
Cool.
Where do they go?
Well, if they want to work with me, they can go
They
to my
do.
website.
By the way, if you're listening, you do. By the way, he's Professor Ayahuasca. You want to work?
You can come to my website, which is alchemyshift.com, and I have a retreat coming up in Costa Rica in November. And it's 3 ceremonies over the course of the week, blending in other spiritual or contemplative or meditation practices in nature, bringing in dance and the body as well. Because what ayahuasca is great at is helping us connect with all of ourselves, including our body. Uh, and so that's in November. And if you don't want to work with me, and that's totally fine, there's a variety of sites out there. Retreat Guru has some retreats on it, but also just search and talk to maybe some of your friends who have done it, or follow that trail, because everybody will relate to a different facilitator in a different way. I would say find out first what is calling you to do it. And it's okay to come to the conclusion of, you know what, I've looked, I can't figure it out, but I know I need to.
Yeah.
That's great. And then figure out how you're going to feel the safest going into that experience and follow that. Because once you're in the experience is when you want to feel safe enough to be uncomfortable. If you're already feeling scared and safe and you're in the middle of the jungle with people you don't know and you can't, nobody else speaks English there, maybe that's the right level for your nervous system, and all power to you. But for a lot of people, I would say do your research, find somebody who you can feel comfortable with going into an uncomfortable experience.
Yeah, man, but what better place than Costa Rica? It's always been voted the happiest place on earth. I mean, why wouldn't you want to do it there in November with my guy right here? I mean, that sounds
Exactly.
amazing right there. So, Michael, this has been awesome, man. I knew the surface level of this stuff. So you took us deep on some really cool stuff. I really appreciate all your information today.
Thanks for having me on, Joe. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So if you guys are listening, go to his website. That was alchemyshift.com, ALCHEMYSHIFT.com. I'll put it in the show notes. You can just click on it if you don't spell good like me. So Michael, keep up the good work, man. We need more people out there. Spread there's another way to solve what's going on with you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Joe.
Absolutely. If you guys are tuning in right now, hey, please share this episode. Maybe there's someone out there that really needs this in their life. It could change their life. You can tell he went through some of the ways that can help people with PTSD and some things, some of these addictions that they've been hopeless. And now there's some hope right here. So if you can change those neural pathways, man, you can change your life. So Michael, keep up the great work. You guys keep listening. We'll see you next week on the Relentless Positivity Podcast.